So the purpose of this video is to discuss with you individually as to assess whether or not you feel like you're a loser or a winner. And I want to dial in on this loser aspect because I think it's easier to start from an understanding of failure and being a metaphysical loser than it is to start from saying I'm definitely a winner and here's why. So when we think about being a loser, I think it's actually quite easy to frame this in a way that's almost ubiquitously understood, in that we have created and designed games in a way to very easily determine the performance level, the capacity, the abilities, the skill levels of a range of different attributes that we all have in our characterization of ourselves in sports, in video games, or in RPGs. Three very popular, what I would say, are formats for determining winning, losing, personal growth, and somewhat outlined with sports, at least athletic ability, akin a little bit to war preparedness, things like that. So we've geniusly enough designed these realms in which we can continually measure and gauge ourselves in our improvement levels. To understand this is very intuitive, I think. There's ELO scores for things like chess, but there's also rankings in other systems in different ways. And then in sport, obviously, it's very easy to determine winners and losers in a round robin or a playoff bracket, something like that. And this can go for both team sports, but also individual. And then us assessing and understanding your sole contributor status versus contribution in a team, events, etc. But I think it's first easy to understand it, but then secondarily you ask always the question almost naturally, how do I get better? How do I become a winner? And how do I win at these things? We have a natural competition element to ourselves. So what I need you to do is transport that mindset towards just yourself in life, because it's easy to comprehend a game which has a limited set of rules. It's bounded by how and what you can do in the game and what elements are at play. So the combinatorics on a game are more simple than they are with the ones at life, and that the understanding of a controlled game versus the free-form, free-for-all that we live in is obviously a much safer space for some people. And this is why you have these men cloistered in their basements, escaping from reality with a virtual reality, or you have men who devote themselves only to sport because there's no other way for them to be able to comprehend their status or their place in the hierarchy outside of this very singular type of situation. What I've done here is borrowed some inspiration on some 4 quadrants, which you could consider maybe not exhaustive, but at least a very nice and approximate attempt to gauge 4, as I say, quadrants of your existence, and you can determine how your performance in life is going from these 4 ones. And I think I like this by saying you can start at 0, and as long as you're headed in the right direction, that's all that counts for a lot of things. But it's also around how we measure performance and how you can understand it, because if you go tomorrow and say I'm going to get better in every way, and no one's told you either the methods or the goals or what exactly better means from a observational measurement point of view, then you can't really perform as you'd be expected to. So what I'm going to do is give you some inspiration, if not guidance, on this. And we'll start maybe with the individual interior. So because we are egos, and egos in our own, we must understand our relationship to the spiritual realm and how we're a perception vehicle, this inference machine from existence, so that there is a reality that interacts with us as soul-bound, I would say meat machines, but this idea that a spirit is bound to our physical bodies, and that we have to understand ourselves holistically from a magic to spirit to reality sense, and that your consciousness is informed by, in particularly in hierarchical senses, by how much you can take strength and power out of this will to power that you have inside of you. So this is really this first step, I would say, in the understanding of in individual consciousness, starting at ground zero, is asking yourself, am I here for treasure? Am I here for power? Am I here because there's an intrinsic satisfaction with some method of living that I need to pursue and be able to align myself to? I think with a lot of the endogenous or intrinsic motivators or life, the aspects to life, you should say how your legacy informs your satisfaction with life. I'll never say happiness is worth pursuing it, because it's not. And happiness and greatness, as Spengler says, are mutually exclusive. But what greatness teaches us is that the level of satisfaction is incomprehensible for a hedonistic society to understand, and that just because you're not happy doesn't mean you're not extremely satisfied. And I think this is that suffering for reward mechanism that Nietzsche and a lot of others talk about, Schopenhauer as well. And so what I want to do is then put you in that stage A, understanding your will to power. What does that mean? Does power mean treasure? Does it mean my legacy status? What exactly is it about who I am that I need to first fathom and then work on extending outwards? This goes into, and as I've said with physiognomy, how you appear. Now, it's one thing to be fantastic at mathematics and a massive galaxy-brained individual who can seamlessly transfer between physics and mathematics and history and biology, whatever. It is another thing to say that the power that is imbued by you needs to be reflected in a physical way, because you are a physical being that needs to interact with a physical realm. And in that, you can improve and grow and be stronger and more powerful. It isn't one-dimensional, I'm studying, I get smarter, this is my body withering as my brain grows. These old style, as you almost call them, old school mentalities around energy usage and production is no longer sufficient. You must become the epitome or the apex of yourself, of your being. And this involves being more muscular, fitter, and in general more hygienic and more attractive. This one's quite an easy one, I think, to understand. Is you know side by side if a picture of yourself 5 years ago is better or worse. Have you gotten fatter? Have you gotten thinner? Has your hair receded? All these small tells, wrinkles from stress versus wrinkles from smiling, all these small tells inform us your performance from this angle. And yes, everyone gets old, so it's not about being afraid of death or age. It's just more about embodying your spirit in a way that I can immediately assume you're a powerful person versus you're a weakling who relies on coping strategies about how smart they are to then justify certain reactions to and from life. Now, being bigger and more muscular, I can assure you, having both being muscular but also knowing guys on both ends of the spectrum, as well as women, this equally applies to women, I should say. It's more related to thin and fatness and a little bit different around appearances, but in general, the male ability or the masculine ability to assume a role at a very high level of leadership and hierarchy a lot of the time comes down to physical presence. Unless we are informed beforehand going into a new situation that someone is the alpha dog in the pack, then we're unable to understand it only in the mechanisms given to us via intuition, which is how big and impressive and strong is this guy, and whether or not he probably will bully me if I try to usurp him. And it's another thing to have a much more considerate, functional society built around manners and politesse and your cerebral faculties, but it's also another thing to understand we're still animals in this very primal sense, and this impacts our social, you could say, exterior here, and you can comprehend it in both the individual interior and exterior. Am I spiritually, mindfully, physically the big fish in the small pond? Have I restricted my social interactions to domains in which I already am swimming quite proficiently, and therefore I can feel good about how well I'm doing and how prodigiously successful I've been? Because you're coping here again, and this is one of those things to understand in the sense that if you have inhibited your growth from a environmental standpoint? Have you never left that small town that you were born up in just because you were afraid of testing yourself in whether it was, as I say, academics or it's sports or it's anything up to including video games? Have you maintained the competitive nature and levels within yourself to understand your own performance? Now, I won't advocate you spend a lot of time playing video games, because it's probably the worst mechanism to improve yourself in, because there's a very limited real world applicability, and most guys who are successful at video games are not successful people. And you should understand that I think naturally, that when you see a guy who's quite good at video games, he's not a type of person you want to look like or be. But it's to say that the mechanisms around rewarding ourselves and society's reflection of your performance as successful can be understood in the same guise as how we understand winners in video games. So and I'll put a picture in here, but the idea that you are a small fish in a big pond, in which you can grow and dominate others in. It's no good being in a small pond that you dominate and wither in, because you've never actually gauged and tested yourself. And not winning is different from self-admittance as a loser, because it's one thing to have tried and lost versus having never tried at all. And that's this very cliched terminology here. But this is what the really, you could say, philosophical truth to it is, that the pushing yourself is a reflection of how much courage you have. The risks you're willing to take are just a function of how much loss you think psychologically you're capable of handling. But you're a strong person. You have to have been a strong person to exist, otherwise you would have yourself some point in time previously. Which brings us to this small but very important function of your social consciousness, which is, I think, where a lot of men, particularly because men are much less, you could say, not empathetic, but socially gifted than women are on average, that we have a lot of anxieties around how people perceive us, and this social interior being a mirror to the exterior, saying, I have this, and they call it, maybe you could be a pretender, but this imposter syndrome perhaps, but it's a complex and a neurotic complex. Do I think I'm good enough, knowing that I don't think I am? When everyone around you, you could understand, is probably being worse than you at many different things. Now, in a single domain, they perhaps are beating you. They are a winner and you are the loser. Ideally, though, that drives you doesn't necessarily defeat you. And this is that social interior saying that almost all of these negativity or negative feedback loops are spooks that don't exist. You've made them exist, or you've been told that they exist in ways that are complete artifice. They're just not real. If society has told you to feel bad about something, you need to reflect on whether that's true or not. This has to be the base level of spookiness being completely dispersed from your brain and your perception of being. You can't live in the realm of ghosts and continue to see phantasms of defeat and comparison and anxiety-inducing losses in realms that don't exist. So this, I think, for me is, well, they're probably equal importance. This, for me, was the hardest one, I would say, to get rid of, is to really analyze what spooks am I living under. Is it religious spooks? Are they social? Are they family? Are they interpersonal? What exactly can I drill down to? What layer of spookiness can I disperse? Because there are these fundamental core parts of our being which are built upon unreality, on these ghosts that are given to us, imbued on us by our parents and by society and by schools. So this, for me, is that last but very important question and quadrant in the understanding of whether you're a loser or not, is, are you being perceived as a loser in a realm that doesn't exist? It's just in your mind. This is the spookiness that Max Stirner has talked about extensively. Now, once we have covered these four quadrants and you can self-analyze yourself, I would love to sit here and work with each one of you, but the point is to very much say, I am the entity in the middle, and if I can reduce myself to the very, very internal point of the axis, then I can only work out, and working out is small victories, it's winning. Now we can talk about winning in a different video, but winning in general, and we know when we win, we have the dopamine release. A victor has the spoils, more or less. The plunder is opposite to the victor. So you know whether or not the game you're competing in is one where a victor takes all the spoils, or it's rewarded, as I said, oppositely. If aught you can garner from just this video is to say, the measurements are always tangible, so we can tell you if you're a winner. Don't think that there is any situation which you can't be a winner in. If it's a debate, if it's in a career, if it's, as I say, at school, there's always our ability as a society to construct a hierarchy, but also appoint and award a winner. And it is up to you to put yourself in situations where you both can be a winner, understand the game, improve yourself, and eventually come out on top. And if that includes treasure, so it means earning lots of money, if that includes power, it means pursuing politics or being in the army or whatever you have, any group that you're interacting with, you should have the aim to be the best version of yourself you can, be the most imposing, best physique version of yourself, the most tranquil and perspicacious brain in a way that allows you to dominate. And this is how we determine winners. And this is what Nietzsche, it's what all these very will to power Schopenhauer philosophers dream about and talk about.